My name is Autumn Brown, and I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. And today, March 15th, 2022, I am talking with Najah-Amatullah Hylton about her experience during the COVID-19 pandemic in Oklahoma. We will be focusing most of our time discussing her role as a teacher, but I have some more general questions about life during this time. Upon the agreement of Najah, this interview will be archived at the OSU Library for future generations. This project is supported through the Institute for Museum and Library Services American Rescue Plan grant funds. Okay, so can you just first of all talk to me about like the personal effect COVID had on you? Like, can you remember, what are your first memories of realizing that this pandemic was going to be like significantly implicating our day-to-day lives?
Yeah. So my best friend and I just constantly, even now, still talk about how we were having conversations and we were like, it's either gonna be just the next couple of weeks or it's gonna be like a year. Neither one of us thought past a year, you know. And I am a terrible intaker of the news. Like I watch the Black Wall Street Times social media pages. I watch certain social media pages who are newsworthy that I feel like I trust, but I don't like take in daily news. And so I actually had strep throat that week, and it was the week right before spring break as a teacher. And so I was not at school anyway. I hadn't been at school for, I think, 3 days. And I, was sending in my lesson plans or whatever, but I was also sick. And so I wasn't paying attention, even more so than I'm already usually not paying attention. I think I had heard, were they already calling it the China virus? I feel like I had heard some stuff about a virus, but I didn't really know. And then, like I said, it was that Thursday night into Friday before spring break. And I got the group text from the English department that was like, hey, they are going to shut down school tomorrow. And again, I hadn't been there for 3 days. So I'm like, what? They are, as if everybody knew that that might be a possibility. I was like, what are we talking about here, guys? I don't know what's going on. And so I started scrolling social and realizing that like a lot of people were out of school on that Friday. I'm pretty sure it was Friday the 13th, actually. On that Friday the 13th, and was like, what is this because of the virus? So it was really weird because I was not even an active part of society in that moment because I was at home with strep throat. And so there was a lot of texting my best friend saying like, so there's a virus and people aren't going to work. I'm very confused because we've never lived through anything like that before. So I spent a lot of time confused, but then also it was like, cool, I don't have to take a sick day for Friday. I would just stay in bed. Y'all let me know what's going on. And also the next week was spring break. So I think the time when I became really aware of what was going on was maybe upcoming into that next week, honestly, in preparation probably for a Tri-City Collective meeting, because of the Tri-City Collectives work with Focus Black Oklahoma and Real Talk and all of the projects that they do. They keep their ear to the news. And so I don't remember if we had a meeting that very next week or if we just had a special meeting come up because it was like, hey, nobody's going to work, so we might as well have a meeting. In fact, if I remember correctly, that might have been how it was. I think our meeting was scheduled for next week, but since everybody's at their house, let's just go ahead and have one now. And whatever I didn't pick up from social media, I got caught up on in that meeting. And then it became a lot of us trying to decide what role we wanted to fill as a group to help people get through it, even though we had no idea if it was going to be 2 weeks or if it was going to be a year. And nobody was projecting outside a year.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I think about it, it's like a really dark time for me because, like you, I was checked out before all of this happened. And so I remember seeing it on the news and just interpreting it as like, oh, it's just like a flu that's going around, like not really realizing the gravity of it. And then I went out of town the next day and on a road trip. And so I'm like in vacation mode. And when I leave, everyone's like living their day-to-day lives. And I swear, like coming back, it felt like I was in an episode of The Walking Dead. Like there were no cars on the road, there was nobody, and like I get chills still thinking about it because it was such a dark moment. Like leaving, feeling like one way, and then coming back to home, and it being like a ghost town and just scary, and you not knowing what's going to happen, and like people are dying, and it's just like, do I have a job? Like, how am I gonna? It was just really dark. So I don't know about you, but like, did you feel that moment of like just uncertainty and just like scariness? Oh, hey, C. Hey, I wish I could just pinch your little cheeks.
You want to say hi real quick?
Hi.
You know Autumn.
I'm Autumn. I've met you before at Halloween.
Yeah. So was the question about what it felt like coming back into everything?
Yeah, like mentally, how were you?
I think I actually dissociated into work a ton. I never really felt any despair or depression. I will be honest and say that like I struggle with depression as a general rule though. So I don't think the pandemic made me any more depressed. Honestly, there are probably ways in which, because I feel isolated a lot of the time. So I think that there are actually ways that the pandemic made me feel less isolated, because now everybody's isolated. So everybody's feeling the same thing that I've been feeling for a long time, you know. But I do think that a lot of what I was doing was dissociating into work. I have more to say. Hang on. Sorry. So yeah, I think the way, because I even remember in the Tri-City Collective meeting, I think all of us were doing that a tiny bit in that first couple of weeks. We maybe the first month, because they were like, actually nobody's coming back to school after spring break for right now anyway, and like teachers were scrambling trying to figure out what they were going to do, and districts are scrambling and parents are scrambling. And so I think the people that I was connected to were a very task-oriented group of people, and also a philanthropic group of people, but like I think we did a lot of like, we're all here, so let's see if we can do some good work, more so than just kind of like sitting in it and wallowing in it. I also had just started my master's degree. I forgot that. Like, so I had started school in January. I didn't start in August. I had started in January. And so I had just finished my midterm, and then we went to all virtual format, and my professor, well, because of the way everything was like an emergency, they didn't all host like Zoom classes. So we didn't even, I don't think we met at all. I don't think we met on Zoom. I think it became just like a discussion board format, you know? And so my workload went down a little bit. She cut our final paper in half, you know, the length requirement in half. And so I think I just was like working instead of feeling. And then April is poetry writing month, and one of my famous poet friends did a live every single day, and invited people as part of, you know, we're all just in the house, so let's do something. And so I joined that as many days as I could. So yeah, I didn't feel as many feelings because I just did other stuff instead. But a lot of the things that I think people feel were feelings that I was familiar with prior to a pandemic.
Yeah. So did you wear PPE, masks, gloves? And if so, do you remember the first time you like had to put that on? And did you have any problem getting access to things like that?
So I think my grandma was who gave me an extra box of gloves because so her my grandfather is deceased, but he was retired Air Force. And so she still is connected to all the military things. She goes to church on base and all of that stuff. And so I think that's where she got her supply of gloves is from the chapel. And she's old, so everybody takes care of her and stuff like that. So she's the one who gave me my gloves. And I started out wearing a bandana because that was like before it was like it needs to be this kind of mask, or the mask should be like this. Like they were like, just cover your face, cover your nose and your mouth. And so I started off wearing a bandana, and I remember definitely it being like, okay, I gotta go to the gas station and I'm gonna put on and for whatever reason the pay at the pump wasn't working, so I had to go inside. And so putting the mask on my face, putting the gloves on, um definitely the sanitizer in my car. And yeah, I remember it being a big deal. And I remember watching people in the car next to you, and you like you did the little scoot where you open your door and then you sit down and then you take off your gloves and then you sanitize your hands and then you fully get in your car. Yeah. And then some people wipe down their steering wheel, and I had all that. So when I finally did get to go to the store, oh my goodness, the store. I don't know if you want me to talk about this real quick, but yeah, the grocery store, I remember people posting like they couldn't find meat anywhere. Well, I live in Midwest City, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City, and I didn't have that problem at all. So, but I was nervous because I had been watching social media. And so it's just me and my daughter. So we didn't need anything right away. But I had to like gear myself up because, okay, once I go to the store, I got to stock up for who knows how long because we're supposed to stay in the house. So I was like, oh goodness, and they're going to be out of everything. Well, what I discovered was that the crests in Midwest City were not out of everything. On the north side in Edmond, maybe they were struggling, but Midwest City Crest was fully stocked. And so I didn't have to worry about that part. But yeah, I think I got like one of the last Clorox wipes, and like, so they were stocked on food is what I mean, but cleaning supplies, those were hard to come by. So yeah, it was wild. I definitely remember that. And I remember the debate about whether or not you still needed to have your mask on outside. I remember that debate for sure.
We've been through so much with COVID, like reliving it from the very beginning, even to now. Like this is the 2-year anniversary, I guess you could say.
It is
And still having kind of like the ramifications of that, and seeing how China has like re-locked down people, and kind of seeing how the trend is, moving Eastern or whatever. So I don't know, just reliving this is really insane to me, because I remember like, going to Walmart and there not being any toilet paper or paper towels. And it's just like, what the heck? So yeah, that's crazy. Did your community institute a public mask mandate, and how did you feel about that? And what was the general response in your community?
Sure. So I if I remember correctly, it goes by city. And so I feel like Midwest City was fairly late to the game. And so back to me and the way I take in news, right? I don't even pay attention. So I didn't actually know. That was actually probably the time in my life where I've always lived in Midwest City, except for maybe a couple of years. And that was the time in my life where I was like, maybe I should know who the mayor of Midwest City is, because like I follow the mayor of Oklahoma City, David Holt. I pay attention to what goes on in Oklahoma City, but not so much Midwest City, because I hadn't had a reason to. I didn't necessarily feel like even my voting district, even though I live in Midwest City, my voting district is still 97, which is Oklahoma City. So, but I feel like Midwest City didn't have one for a while. I feel like David Holt in OKC was one of the earlier ones to have one. But I think because of where I live, which is right across from a junior college and only about 1 mile from Tinker Air Force Base, and the Walmart that's right by me is the one that's closest to Tinker Air Force Base. Well, the full size one that's closest to Tinker Air Force Base. Even though it wasn't mandated in Midwest City, especially I think because it was in Oklahoma City and whatnot, and because of the military, if you went into Walmart, more than half of the people had on masks, and around this area, more than half of the people had on masks. And I think that that's more because of like the military atmosphere than the law.
So you mentioned that you really don't pay attention to the news and you weren't really like staying up on that. So how did you feel about the information you were seeing related to the pandemic early on? Like, where did you get most of your information?
Social media. So it was, so I, like I said, I follow news outlets that I trust. I will, and of course, Google pops up the news. When you just open Google, it pops up, important links. And so, and I click on those fairly often. I was a journalism major, and so I know things like Wall Street Times and New York Times and USA Today are more reliable than some of these other, whatever. And then beyond that, just social media, just the various people on there, whether, and they range from Trevor Noah to Rachel Maddow to local Black Wall Street Times to, I was trying to think of who I follow. What is her first name? Angela Hylton. She has my last name, that's why I follow her, but she's a broadcaster in New York. And I feel like the Good Morning America, maybe, I feel like pops up in my feed fairly often. I go to the search pages for Twitter and for Instagram a lot just to see what's trending. And I get a lot from there. I also have a jaded perspective towards the news that if it's not an outlet where I like know the people and trust the mission, I'm like, what are you lying about today? And so, and then of course my grandmother is a stringent Fox News watcher, and so she would call me regularly to tell me whatever Tucker Carlson was talking about, and I would have to be like, yeah, but you told me 5 things. How many of them might possibly have a nugget of truth in them? Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. We're 6 months into COVID, fall 2020, right?
Yes.
How did the beginning of the fall 2020 school semester affect you?
So the first problem was that nobody could figure out when they wanted school to start. And like, in retrospect, the decision-making process among people is very bizarre to me. I guess everybody knew, well, no, I remember, it's coming back to me. I was gonna say, I guess everybody knew we were gonna start virtual, but that goes back to state by state politics, right? Because we were having debates in Oklahoma City public schools that my teacher friends in New York weren't having, that my friends in Maryland and in mainly Maryland, that they didn't have to debate if they were going back virtually or in person. That wasn't a question. They were going back virtually because we were still in the middle of a pandemic. But I guess if I remember right, it was about funding. What I don't remember is who the funding threat came from, if it came from state or if it came from federal. I want to say it came from federal. I want to say it was good old Betsy DeVos, but I don't know for a fact. I feel like that's what it was, though. It was like, I do remember this statement very clearly, though. If you don't come back in person, you risk losing your funding.
I remember that slightly now that you mention it.
And so, again, with the push and pull between state and fed, and honestly, between how many changes hands and why, but Oklahoma City Public Schools was one of the first to say, like, okay, yeah, y'all made us nervous with that threat, but we're not going to come back in person. We're going to come back all virtual. But like I said, it was just weird because my friends in New York started at their regular time virtually because they knew they were going to start virtually because it wasn't even a debate. Yeah, it was delayed. So Oklahoma City has been, prior to pandemic, Oklahoma City has been starting anywhere between 3 weeks to 1 week earlier than other districts around it. And so instead of starting the first week of August or the second week of August, we didn't start until August 30th, I'm pretty sure. And it was because nobody could decide what we were going to do. But then we started August 30th and we started all virtual. And they said, I think the other thing that they were delaying on is they didn't want to continue having it be up in the air how long we were going to be virtual. So they didn't want to start until they could say it's going to be like this for X amount of time. And so when it started, it was then virtual until they said it was going to be virtual at least through the end of the first quarter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then leading into the winter of 2020, there were a lot of discussions about, like, now we're going into flu season, things like that, and the second wave of COVID coming in, that, aligned with the weather change. So is this something that you thought of, especially considering the first quarter ends, October-ish, kind of leading into flu season? So is this like a thought that kind of registered to you, like they may be opening us back up face to face, but we may be, having a second wave?
So a couple of things. Number one, our first quarter didn't end until November 4th because of the late start. But then secondly, that all was part of the thing. OKCPS was like, we're going to come back in person on the beginning of the second quarter. And there was a, group of teachers and a group of parents and people who were like, why? For the reason that you just said, like, this is actually the high sickness time. Like, this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't do this. But they didn't like their virtual attendance numbers. They didn't like their grades. They didn't like a lot of things. And so they were like, we're gonna come back in person. So we did come back in person for exactly 4 days. And then cases were so out of control that we went back virtual until January.
Wow. And just because my dad was teaching at OKCPS, and I just kind of remember he was home a lot. So just to kind of put it into perspective, the 2020-2021 school year, how long were y'all virtual in Oklahoma City?
So, well, different question if you're talking about kids or teachers.
So with the students.
Okay, so students were at home from minus that 4 days. They were at home the entire first semester, and most students were out the third quarter as well, but they started letting them back in for like they let students with severe and profound IEPs, they let students come in for like tutoring, or if a student was just really struggling, they would let them come in third quarter. And so everybody was out the first semester minus those 4 days, and then mostly the third quarter as well. And then everybody came back fourth quarter.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So do you remember hearing much about like the 1 year anniversary of COVID being declared a global pandemic?
I actually pay really close attention to like memories and dates and anniversaries and stuff. And I was paying attention. It's funny that I forgot it this year, because last year I was paying really close attention. I was like, okay, the anniversary is coming up in like a year, in like a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And I remember asking my friends around me if everybody was going to have an emotional breakdown whenever the 1 year anniversary came up. And I actually posted about it. I was like, hey, heads up, so that this doesn't sneak up on you. It's coming. Like, are you going to have feelings you're going to need to process through? Because maybe you should start early. I didn't see a ton of posts. I didn't see a ton. And I don't know if that is social mass scale disassociation, or if the anniversary didn't hit people. I don't know.
Or if like we were still just in the middle of it at that moment, that it was just like, I mean, does it still kind of feel like we're in the middle of a pandemic?
That's so hard to say, right? Because everything, I think that we need names. It's like pandemic light and like pandemic heavy. And then on Twitter, I saw somebody say lockdown COVID. But okay, Oklahoma, maybe OKC, Midwest City, we were only in lockdown COVID till like June 2020, maybe not even quite that long, right? Because I remember the biggest thing for us, and I think that this is probably true in like Kansas and Texas too, the biggest thing for us is like, what all can we get away with doing outside? Like that was our big thing. Well, if we just go outside, can we do the things outside, right? And for me, it was a shock to see, like, I went to Panama last year when all the travel bans got lifted. Finally, I went to Panama, and it's funny because all the travel bans I feel like lifted in May. I went at the very end of June, and when I scheduled my trip, when I first put the plane tickets in, and I was like looking at customs stuff and like what was I gonna have to do at the airport and whatever, I watched it go from having no warnings up to being like, maybe you should reschedule your trip. And I was like, I'm not about to reschedule this trip. But I remember thinking, oh, I'm getting in under the wire because they're about to shut it back down. Like, okay, well, we're just gonna go. And in June of 21, late June of 21, in Panama, they're still wearing masks outside. And so, yeah, it was a shocker to me. I was like, oh, like I remember getting off the plane and my brother picking me up, and he wanted to see, I hadn't met them before. He wanted to see how much I look like my sister. And so he asked me to take my mask down, and I went to like leave it down because we were outside, and he was like, no, you got to put your mask back on. And I was like, we're outside, bro. Nope. All right. So I talked to a friend yesterday, and she lives in DC. And she was saying that aside from a brief time last summer when their mandates were lifted, when their mandates are on, they wear their masks outside as well. And I was like, that's so wild, because in Oklahoma, that was our first thing. We were like, we'll wear them inside, but we're not wearing them, Johns, outside. We're just not doing it. And so that is the wildest part to me, is the masks outside part. And it's just also just really weird, the difference between just how different communities react to things, right? Like, I'm not saying we were right in Oklahoma or they're wrong in other places. It's just like, in Oklahoma, we collectively decided we're not wearing masks outside, but that didn't happen other places. In other places, they were like, we just have to wear them if we're out. And so I said all of that to say, I feel like here we were only in lockdown COVID for like 3 months. And then it was like, just go outside, be in your own house or be outside. And the rest of apparently the world stayed in lockdown COVID for a while. Like, I think they might have stayed in for 9 months to a whole calendar year. Other people might not have come out until summer 21. Yeah. And so I think those people, that might have been, like you were saying, that might have been why the anniversary wasn't like, because like we're still here. But then I think the wave, I don't know, we had that big wave, but then there were people who didn't take the wave seriously because like we're vaccinated now, so we don't have to, nobody has to worry about infection spreading, rising, whatever. Yeah, so I feel like we've been in, maybe there's 4 categories: lockdown, pandemic heavy, pandemic light, and like pandemic denial. And I feel like Oklahoma looks for an opportunity to go into pandemic denial. Yeah. Like, the second the mandate lifts, it's like, cool, we're back in denial mode. Cool. Back to normal. Exactly.
And I think, thinking back to what you said about in other states, like my best friend in Michigan, they were very rigid with their lockdown procedures. And I remember her telling me, like, even like walking outside, walking in parks was not something people did there. Like, and I remember telling her, like, that was the only thing we could do, is like walk in parks. And like, I would tell her about meeting you at the park and walking around. And she's just like, no, like, we didn't do that here. It was really like a lockdown. And so when I think about how people mentally dealt with that, I'm just like, that had to be rough, because like you said, we at least had outside here in Oklahoma, and our governor really didn't take it as seriously as other governors did. And so we were a lot more like loose with things in other states. So yeah, you're totally right. Like, some states really took that seriously, which, I mean, they should have, but
no, absolutely. It's just interesting, man, because I would love to see, I need somebody, I'm sure it exists already, but I would love to see like states lined up against each other and their numbers trend based on like mask mandates and like what's open and what's not open and stuff like that.
Yeah. So do you feel like things would get back to normal?
I mean, here they already are for the most part. We're doing our big, I remember thinking like, we'll be back to normal when the music festivals start back up, right? So like last year they did have Coachella and whatever last year, but we didn't, in Oklahoma, we didn't have Norman Music Festival. We didn't have, those, but our Norman Music Festival is on for 2022. And so, and I think South by Southwest is just now back for 2022. And so I think that I had this conversation with my friend in Florida, because that's another, I think it's also, man, like I said, I want to see that side by side scale, because even as we're talking about how it's like, dang, Oklahoma didn't take it that seriously. If we feel like we didn't take it that seriously, Florida really didn't take it that seriously. My friend lives in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and she was saying like they stopped wearing their masks inside before we stopped. And so, but I think what the pervasive attitude is now is like, get your vaccination, keep your immune system up, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Like and it's not really, oh gosh, I'm so torn, because how do you have a different attitude when it's a contagion that's based on like groups, right? Like, it's one thing to say, I'm gonna make sure I drink a lot of water so that I don't hurt my kidneys by only drinking, coffee and soda. Like, that's me taking care of my own body. But like, me being the last person in the metro wearing a mask, what is that going to accomplish for anybody? Me being the last person in my neighborhood who's not going to events or going out and eating at restaurants or whatever, what's that going to accomplish for anybody? So it's weird because it like sucks that everybody isn't working together, I guess. But also I wonder, how long were we capable of maintaining that heightened sense of awareness,
Yeah, I get it. A lot of people call it like a new normal, or like never going back to a normal, but I don't know. It seems like it's just like a life before COVID and life after COVID kind of thing. Like, to think about going back to a life before COVID just seems really hard. Like, I mean, it's like we're doing it, but we always live with that like life with COVID, like in the back of our heads. Like, it's traumatizing almost.
No, for sure. And I wiped down my groceries for a year. Like, I'm pretty sure I say a year, it might have been 18 months. It might have only been 6 months ago that I stopped wiping down my groceries. And like, it's very strange, because it's like, to go from, and even that same friend I was telling you about in DC, she was talking about how they still were wearing their masks outside. She said they just dropped their mandate like a week or two ago. And she said that everybody's like, okay, so I just go out and don't wear it, because I think, especially as adults, right, we are like, are we only doing this because someone told us to, or are we doing it because we think that it's the right and safe thing to do? Because if we think it's the right and safe thing to do, then the mandate isn't what decides if we do it or not, right? So then we should keep it on. But then, is the mandate based on like, do we believe that the mandate is based on trends of facts and trends of like infections and things like that? So it's like, it's truly just not necessary at this time, so it really is safe to not wear it. Like, it calls into question all of your motives, all of your theories about, honestly, how to function in a society, if we're being honest.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So what was your overall experience finishing up we've already kind of talked about the 2020 school year, but let's talk about finishing up the 2021 school year, spring 2021, and going into fall 2022.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, fall 2021.
Yeah. So honestly, everybody was nervous to come back in the fourth quarter. And a lot of, I think that the reason for the coming back, now also I have a skewed perspective because I'm a high school teacher, not an elementary or a middle school teacher, but and yeah, I guess for the record, I believe that it's really important for younger kids to have like the socialization and the supervision and the whatnot. I think that older kids a lot of the time feel trapped at high school anyway. And so whether we're in or out or hybrid, or, you know, universities do hybrid where you get to choose every single week. Am I going to class or am I not going to class? I either log into Zoom or I show up in the classroom, and it doesn't matter. And you don't have to like tell anybody ahead of time. You just decide. I think that there are a lot of reasons where older students could benefit from something more like that. But I think that coming back wasn't necessarily productive for class work. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that we got that much done. I think people were glad to be around people again, but I don't think we got that much done. There was a lot of stress about, you know, whether or not, well, I mean, about contact tracing, about who is, about seating charts, you know, who's sitting near who and who's been around who. And at the school I was at the time, a lot of people are like related to each other. Well, so and so's cousin. So like this kid is quarantined, but this kid is not in that class, wasn't with that, you know, wasn't with this group. They're cousins. So we got to quarantine this one too. And like, you know, whatever. They're cousins and they both live with their grandma or whatever it is. So I think it was mostly just a jumble. It was like, let's just be here and let's just pretend like we're doing a bunch of makeup work, but a lot of kids are not, and let's just kind of enjoy each other's company. Like that's not how it was said to us, but that's how it feels in retrospect, you know. So over the summer, I think everybody knew we would come back in person. Oh, I'm sorry. In fourth quarter, we did have a virtual day. I don't remember what day it was. Some schools did Wednesday, some schools did Fridays, some schools did. So, you know, you only had a 4-day week. And so everybody wondered if we would have that in the fall as well, if it would be a 4-day week or a 5-day week. But it became a thing of like teachers just chasing their tails, trying to figure out, are we trying to catch up, or are we just going to meet students where they are and do what we can? And I think that the perspective among teachers was widely, we're just going to meet them where they are. But that is definitely not the most common perspective among administrators and higher ups. And they're more like, we got to catch them up because we got to graduate and we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to meet these test scores, we got to still, again, right? They only canceled all the tests and all the things for that one school year. Like we came back in the fall and everything was back to like, all right, and your first benchmark is in a month and you're, you know, and that was a battle that, I mean, that we definitely fought that battle at my school. Like, why are we giving benchmarks? These kids we've all been through a pandemic. We missed almost a year of school. Like, why would we do that? But the states need their measurements for whatever reason they need those. And yeah, so the disconnect, I think, between admin and teachers has gotten much wider because, you know, the administrators feel obligated to try and meet the same standards that their bosses told them to meet before, and the teachers are like, y'all, absolutely not.
Yeah. So I guess that leads me to kind of the last two questions I have is first, just what have been some barriers that you faced as an educator since the beginning of the pandemic, even to today?
Um, I want to think, I know exactly what I want to say, but I want to think of how to phrase it. Kids, especially the older ones that I work with, the high schoolers that I work with, realize, just like adults did, you know, with the great resignation and all of that stuff, kids realize that like school, even more so than before, didn't feel like it was directly connected to anything super duper important to them. They already felt that way, and they feel that way even more so after the pandemic. And so you have your select group of kids who have a reason to want to go to college, and that was already on the wane because the debt situations and all that stuff. Nobody wants to be in debt. But aside from that select group of kids, and you know, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but it doesn't feel like very many. It feels like maybe a quarter. I haven't actually done the study, but it feels to me like about a quarter. Aside from them, I feel like kids as a general rule are like, why are we here? And why am I doing this? You know? And I actually think it would not be a bad thing for upper administrators, educators to get together and redefine that. You know, I have inherent value for education, but education's not being marketed to me. It's not about whether or not I believe in education. It's about whether or not you can get kids to want to learn, right? That idea of wanting to learn versus having to be there for truancy versus just having to be there so that you can get a job later on, like a high school diploma, whatever. All of those things are in question now. And I think that it would actually truly benefit society if there were some task forces put together to say, like, let's redefine why we're here.
Yeah. And one thing that I've kind of seen a trend in like South Carolina is the implementation of like career tech. So, and even I think Douglas High School may be bringing back some of the VOTech classes that they once offered. So I definitely see what you're saying about this move to redefine the purpose of education, because for some people, it's like you said, checking a box to make sure you're here so your parents don't go to jail, versus actually getting them ready for life outside of K-12 education. So I think you're absolutely right. I think education is going to have to do something different, because you can't keep fooling not only the students, but the teachers, like the teachers who are like, I don't need to be here every day. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's true across the board for all employees, realizing like, you don't need my body in this office to do this job. Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask is, imagine someone is looking at these interviews 50 years from now.
Yeah.
What is something that you want them to just take away from having experienced the COVID pandemic from 2020 until?
So I think the age old, like, keep your people close and like identify who your people are, because I kind of think that there's some use in knowing who your pod would be, even if we're never going to go back into lockdown COVID. Even if we're never going to go back into lockdown COVID, I think that there's some use in knowing who your pod would be, because those are the people you should prioritize over other things, right? Like, those are the people that you take off work to go help do something for. Those are the people that you travel to, even if they move to somewhere else, right? Versus the people who you're just friends with, who you're just cool with, and that's fine. But I think that prioritizing that is probably beneficial to our functioning. That said, because those are the people that you might want to form a homeschool co-op with, because you can get a homeschool designation fairly simply, and if only one person can stay home with all the kids, but you don't feel like the schools around you are giving you the options that you want for your child, maybe the best thing for you and your pod to do is, put your 6 kids together in one house while the other parents work, and figure it out that way. I think that building smaller communities in the midst of our larger community is what it would behoove a lot of us to do. Again, I think that's just what COVID taught us, right? Not because that necessarily exact same thing is going to happen again, but there are a lot of life circumstances in which that would benefit, to just have those people and have those structures, have that stuff in place. Society is what we make it, right? I think stuff like having those small groups, having those pods. I really don't mind the word pod. I don't like, some people probably don't like it, but I do. I think some people feel like it like makes us sound like animals or like vegetables, and I'm like, I mean,
I use the word pods in Love is Blind in the
oh,
pod.
true, there you go. So like those same pods can be what people use to do like grassroots politics movements. You know what I mean? If you have a core group of people who connect around a certain interest, that core group of people can be a force to get someone out of office or get someone into office. I think we have got to now transition out of survival mode and into what did we learn and how can we use it for the future. And I think that small group to large group scale and connecting on our various interests is probably the way.
No, I love that. That's awesome. Oh, thank you so much for reliving that time. I really appreciate your perspective as a teacher and just your perspective overall. I think that we're definitely going to look back on this in 10 years and think about like, man, like what did we go through? You know what I'm saying? What did people go through? So I appreciate you taking the time on your spring break. And yeah, just whenever you get a chance to fill out those forms, just email them to me at your convenience, and I'll reach out soon.
Perfect. Thank you.